He went into the ancient woods seeking honor, hoping to win the chief's daughter with a hunter's prize. But the forest guards older, darker secrets. The tracks he finds aren't natural. The silence is heavy with watching eyes. And the thing that emerges in the moonlight isn't just a beast. It's a nightmare. You felt that chill, didn't you? That whisper of fear. Before we unleash the full terror lurking in the Blackwood, smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to face the darkness alone. The sun beat down on the village, baking the earth dry. Children's laughter echoed between the sturdy wickiups, woven from brush and hide, their sounds a familiar rhythm to the day. Dogs lazed in scarce patches of shade, tongues lolling. Life moved at the steady pace set by seasons and traditions, a rhythm Nayland felt deep in his bones. He sat outside his family's dwelling, carefully straightening the feathers on a new arrow shaft. His hands, though young, moved with practiced confidence, his focus intense. He was strong, his muscles honed by hunts and the rigors of warrior training, his eyes sharp and watchful, missing little of the life unfolding around him. From the corner of his eye, he saw Mahala emerge from her father's lodge, the largest in the village. She carried a water skin, her movements graceful, her dark hair catching glints of sunlight. Their eyes met for a fleeting moment across the dusty clearing. In that instant, a silent understanding passed between them. A shared hope, a quiet affection that needed no words. Nalin's heart gave a familiar thump against his ribs. She was the chief's daughter, wise beyond her years, with a spirit as strong and gentle as the morning breeze. And Nalin loved her more than words could say. He returned his attention to the arrow, but his thoughts remained on Mahala and on her father. Chief Chikari was a man carved from the land itself, stern and wise, his face a map of seasons endured and decisions made. He carried the weight of his people's safety and prosperity, and his word was law, respected without question. Nalin knew that winning Mahala's hand was not just a matter of the heart, it was a matter of honor, of proving his worthiness not just to her, but to her father and the entire tribe. He had seen the chief watching him lately, during hunts, during council fires, during the quiet hours of village life. Chikari's gaze was assessing, weighing Nalin's skill, his spirit, his readiness. Later that day, as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, the village gathered, the air cooled, carrying the scent of wood smoke and roasting meat. The chief stood before his lodge, tall and imposing, his presence commanding silence. His gaze swept over his people, pausing for a moment longer on Nalin. "My people," Chikari began, his voice deep and resonant, carrying easily through the stillness. "We live by the strength of our hunters, the courage of our warriors, and the wisdom of our traditions." He spoke of the changing seasons, the need for vigilance, the importance of unity. Then his eyes found Nalin again, holding his gaze steady. "Nalin," the chief said, his voice clear, "you have shown skill with the bow and spear. You move with the quiet step of the hunter." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "You have asked for the hand of my daughter, Mahala." A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. Nalin felt every eye turn towards him. He stood tall, meeting the chief's gaze, his heart pounding a drumbeat against his ribs. Mahala, standing near her father, lowered her eyes, but Nalin saw the faint blush on her cheeks. Mahala is daughter to the chief, Chikari continued, his tone leaving no room for doubt. Her husband must be a man who can provide, who can protect, who carries the spirit of the Apache strong within him. Words are wind. Deeds are the stones upon which a life is built. He raised a hand pointing towards the dark line of trees bordering the plains to the north. The Blackwood forest tests the spirit. Deep within lies the great mountain cat, the puma, clever, swift and strong. A worthy challenge for a worthy warrior. His gaze locked onto Nalin. Venture alone into the Blackwood. Hunt the puma. Return with its hide, unmarked by scavengers, as proof of your skill, your courage, and your readiness to join my family, to care for my daughter. Do this, and Mahala will be yours. The challenge hung in the air, heavy and absolute. It was more than just a hunt, it was a trial. The Blackwood was vast, its deeper reaches little known and seldom travelled. The puma was a respected and dangerous predator. To hunt it alone required immense skill and bravery. Nalin felt the weight of expectation, the eyes of the village upon him, the silent plea in Mahala's posture. He drew a deep breath, feeling the dry air fill his lungs. He bowed his head respectfully to the chief. "It will be done, my chief," he said, his voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil within. Determination settled over him, hard and bright. He would not fail. For Mahala, for his honor, he would face the Blackwood and return victorious. As the gathering dispersed, murmurs followed Nalin. Some were words of encouragement, slaps on the back from friends, but others were whispers of doubt. "The Blackwood is deep," one elder muttered. "The puma is quicksilver," another added. "He is young," a third voice hissed, laced with skepticism. Nalin heard them, but pushed the doubts away. He caught Mahala's eye one last time. Her look wasn't one of doubt, but of quiet faith mixed with a deep, undeniable worry that tightened his resolve even further. He would do this. He had to. The chief's word had been given. The path was set. It led into the shadows of the Blackwood. The first light of dawn painted the eastern sky a soft grey as Nalin began his preparations. There was no time for hesitation, no room for second thoughts. The chief's challenge required immediate action, a demonstration of readiness that began long before setting foot in the forest. He moved with quiet purpose, each action deliberate and precise. First, his bow, a sturdy weapon crafted from seasoned hickory, its string tight and true. He checked the wood for any sign of weakness, rubbed it smooth with animal fat to protect it from moisture, and tested the tension of the string until it hummed with contained power. Next came the arrows. He inspected each one, ensuring the shafts were straight, the flint heads sharp and securely fastened, the feathers perfectly aligned for stable flight. These were not mere tools. They were extensions of his will, his skill made manifest. He tucked them carefully into his quiver, along with the special shafts reserved for larger game. His knife, carried in a sheath at his hip, was already razor-sharp, its edge honed daily. He checked the handle's grip, ensuring it was secure. He packed light rations, dried meat, parched corn, enough for a few days if the hunt proved difficult. Water he would find in the streams of the Blackwood. He donned sturdy moccasins, tied leggings tight against thorns and brush, and slung his quiver over his shoulder. He was ready, physically at least. As he worked, Kayet, an elder hunter whose wisdom Nalin deeply respected approached him. Kayet's face was lined like a riverbed, his eyes holding the accumulated knowledge of countless seasons in the wild. He watched Nalin for a moment, then nodded slowly. "The Blackwood guards its secrets well, Nalin," the elder said, his voice raspy like dry leaves. "The puma is wise. It knows the paths you walk before you take them. Move like the shadow, breathe like the wind. Listen not just with your ears, but with your spirit. The forest speaks to those who understand its language." He placed a weathered hand briefly on Nalin's shoulder. "Trust your instincts. They are the whispers of the ancestors guiding your steps." Nalin bowed his head in thanks. "I will remember your words, Elder." The final preparation was the hardest. He sought out Mahala. She stood waiting near the edge of the village, where the familiar paths gave way to the untamed wilderness. The morning sun cast long shadows, and the air was cool and still. She didn't speak immediately, her dark eyes searching his face, filled with a mixture of pride and fear. "You go," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "I go," Nalin confirmed, his own voice tight with emotion he tried to conceal. "I will return, Mahala, with the proof the chief requires." "Be careful, Nalin," she pleaded, stepping closer. "The Blackwood, it can be treacherous. The puma is not the only danger there." A shiver seemed to pass through her, though the morning was not cold. He reached out, gently touching her arm. "My skills are sharp. My heart is set. I will be careful." Mahala reached into a small pouch at her belt and drew out a small, smooth piece of wood, intricately carved into the shape of a soaring bird. It felt warm from her touch. "My mother gave this to me," she said, pressing it into his hand. "She said it carries the spirit of watchfulness, of safe flight. May it guide you and keep you safe." Nalin closed his fingers around the small carving, its smooth surface a tangible link to her, to the life he hoped to build. "I will keep it close," he promised, his voice thick, "and I will think of you." Their eyes held for a long moment, saying more than words ever could. Then, with a final, determined nod, Nalin turned away. He couldn't linger. Delay would seem like hesitation. He squared his shoulders, clutched the small bird carving in his hand for a second, then tucked it securely inside his tunic, against his heart. He strode towards the dark line of trees, the entrance to the Blackwood, without looking back. He couldn't bear to see the worry that he knew would be etched on Mahala's face. The familiar sounds of the village faded behind him, replaced by the rustle of leaves underfoot and the whispering breeze through the pines. The air grew cooler, smelling of damp earth and decaying leaves. He was leaving the known world, stepping across a threshold into the wild, the domain of the puma, the place where his worthiness would be tested. The chief's word had set the task. The elder's advice echoed in his mind. Mahala's token rested against his skin. Now it was up to him. He took his first steps onto the shadowed path leading into the heart of the Blackwood. The transition was immediate. One moment, Nalin felt the familiar sun-baked earth of the plains beneath his moccasins. The next, he was swallowed by the cool green twilight of the Blackwood. Tall pines and ancient oaks formed a dense canopy overhead, filtering the sunlight into shifting patterns on the forest floor. The air hung heavy and still, rich with the scent of pine needles, damp soil, and unseen blossoms. For the first few hours, the forest felt like familiar territory. an extension of the hunting grounds closer to the village. Squirrels chattered indignantly from high branches. Unseen birds called back and forth in complex melodies, and the tracks of deer and rabbits crisscrossed the narrow game trails Nalin followed. He moved with the fluid silence Kayet had advised, his senses alert, reading the subtle signs of the forest. A broken twig here, a scuffed patch of moss there, the faint indentation of a hoof print in the soft earth. His eyes scanned the trees, the undergrowth, the patches of light and shadow, searching for any sign of his elusive quarry. He found tracks of smaller cats, bobcats perhaps, but nothing indicating the presence of the great puma. He knew patience was paramount. The mountain cat was a master of stealth, preferring the higher, rockier terrain, and seldom venturing near the forest edge unless driven by hunger. Nalin needed to go deeper, pushing further into the heart of the Blackwood than he had ever gone before. As the sun climbed higher, reaching its zenith, the forest changed. The trees grew thicker, their ancient trunks interwoven with vines. The familiar bird calls faded, replaced by a deeper, more pervasive quiet. The light grew dimmer, the shadows longer and cooler. Nalin felt a growing sense of isolation, a profound awareness of being utterly alone in this vast, indifferent wilderness. The silence wasn't empty. It felt watchful, expectant. He found a clear, fast-running stream and knelt to drink, refilling his small water skin. The water was icy cold, tasting of minerals and wet stone. As he knelt there, scanning the opposite bank, he saw tracks. Large paw prints pressed deep into the muddy edge. Definitely feline, and significantly larger than a bobcat's. A thrill went through him. Puma. The tracks were reasonably fresh, perhaps half a day old. His quarry was near. With renewed purpose, Nalin rose and carefully crossed the stream, stepping on submerged stones to avoid leaving his own scent near the tracks. He began following the trail, his focus narrowing, every sense straining for the slightest sign. The tracks led him upward, away from the stream, into denser thickets and stands of older, darker trees. The going became more difficult, the undergrowth thicker, forcing him to move more slowly, more cautiously. Hours passed. The sun began its slow descent, casting long, distorted shadows across the forest floor. The puma tracks remained elusive, sometimes clear, sometimes vanishing on patches of rock or beds of dry leaves, forcing Nalin to circle patiently until he picked up the trail again. He knew the cat was likely aware of him, perhaps even watching him from some hidden vantage point. The thought sent a prickle down his spine, a mixture of excitement and apprehension, as dusk began to settle, painting the filtered sky overhead in shades of grey and violet. Nalin knew he needed to make camp. He found a small sheltered clearing beneath a thick cluster of pines, relatively dry and offering good visibility of the surrounding area. He cleared a small space, careful not to disturb the ground more than necessary. He wouldn't risk a fire. The smoke could alert his quarry or attract unwanted attention from other predators. He chewed slowly on some dried meat, washing it down with water, his ears constantly attuned to the sounds of the forest. But the sounds were wrong. The usual evening chorus of insects and frogs was muted, almost absent. The wind sighing through the pines seemed to carry whispers he couldn't quite decipher. An owl hooted nearby, its call sounding unnaturally sharp, almost like a warning. Then an abrupt, heavy silence fell, smothering the lesser sounds. It pressed in on Nalin, thick and unnerving. He scanned the deepening shadows around his small camp, his hand resting instinctively on the handle of his knife. Nothing moved. Yet the feeling of being watched intensified, prickling the back of his neck. Suddenly, from somewhere deep in the woods, a twig snapped, loudly, too loud for a squirrel or a deer. Heavy. Nalin froze, every muscle tensing. He strained his ears, listening into the profound silence that followed. Nothing, only the blood pounding in his ears and the heavy stillness of the Blackwood night closing in around him. The hunt had begun, but a cold knot of unease tightened in his stomach. Something felt different about this part of the forest. Something felt wrong. Nalin slept lightly, drifting in and out of a wary consciousness, his hand never far from his knife. The unsettling silence of the previous evening persisted through the night, broken only by the sighing wind and the occasional distant cry of a night bird that sounded strangely mournful. He rose before the first hint of dawn, chewing on dry rations in the pre-dawn chill, anxious to pick up the puma's trail again. The strange feeling from the night before lingered, a faint residue of unease that clung to him like the morning mist clinging to the forest floor. He found the tracks relatively easily, leading away from his campsite towards a ridge littered with large boulders and fallen trees. This was more likely puma territory. He moved with heightened caution, his senses stretched taut. The air felt heavy, expectant. He noticed an odd lack of other animal signs. No deer tracks overlaid the pumas, no rabbit droppings, fewer bird calls even as the sun rose higher, casting dappled light through the dense canopy. It was as if the other creatures of the forest were actively avoiding this area, giving it a wide berth. He pushed the unsettling thought aside, focusing on the hunt. His purpose was clear: find the puma, make the kill, return to Mahala. Doubts and strange feelings were luxuries he couldn't afford. He followed the tracks up the ridge, his moccasins silent on the pine needles and rock. The trail was clearer here, the prints distinct in patches of softer earth between the stones. Then he saw it. Scratched deep into the bark of a massive oak tree were long parallel gouges, claw marks, but they were too high for a puma, even one standing on its hind legs. And the spacing? It seemed subtly wrong. Nalin frowned, running his fingers over the deep scratches. Bear? Possibly, but the marks seemed sharper, somehow more deliberate than a bear's territorial scratching. He scanned the surrounding trees. He found similar marks on another trunk nearby, just as high, just as strangely spaced. A flicker of the previous night's unease returned, stronger this time. He tried to dismiss it. Perhaps a larger puma than he expected, reaching high to mark its territory. But the explanation felt thin, unsatisfying. He pressed on, following the tracks along the ridge. The path led him into a narrow ravine, choked with ferns and shadowed even under the midday sun. Here, the feeling of being watched became almost palpable, a physical pressure on his skin. He paused, listening intently. The only sound was the drip of water from mossy rocks and the faint rustle of his own breathing. Yet he couldn't shake the sensation of unseen eyes following his every move. And then he smelled it. A heavy, musky scent, different from the clean smell of pine and damp earth. It was vaguely animalistic, but overlaid with something else, something rank and unpleasant that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. He scanned the ravine, his hand tightening on his bow. Nothing. The scent faded as quickly as it had appeared, leaving him wondering if he had imagined it. He emerged from the ravine onto a small plateau covered in sparse grass and low bushes. And there, near the center of the plateau, he saw it. His breath hitched in his throat. It wasn't the puma. It was a deer, or what was left of it. The carcass lay sprawled on the ground, but it hadn't been killed cleanly, nor had it been fed upon in the typical manner of a predator. It looked ravaged, torn apart with horrific, indiscriminate violence. Limbs were wrenched from their sockets, the hide ripped away in great chunks, the flesh shredded. The sheer brutality of it went far beyond the needs of hunger. This was not the work of a puma, nor a bear, nor wolves. This was something else, something savage and frenzied. Nalin approached cautiously, his eyes scanning the ground around the carcass. He saw tracks in the disturbed earth. They were huge, far larger than any puma print, and disturbingly misshapen. Vaguely canine, perhaps, but elongated, with deep impressions that suggested immense weight and power. They were unlike any track he had ever seen. A cold dread seeped into him, chilling him despite the warmth of the day. Kayet's words echoed in his mind. Listen, not just with your ears, but with your spirit. His spirit was screaming now, warning him. The unsettling silence, the strange claw marks, the eerie lack of other animals, the rank scent, and now this horrific scene and the monstrous tracks. They all pointed to something deeply unnatural lurking in the Blackwood. His mission, the puma, Mahala, they felt suddenly distant, overshadowed by a new, terrifying reality. He wasn't just a hunter in the wild anymore. He was an intruder in a place where something dark and violent held sway, and he knew, with a certainty that settled like ice in his gut, that he was being watched. He slowly backed away from the gruesome kill site, his eyes scanning the dense tree lines surrounding the plateau, searching the shadows. The forest felt alien now, hostile. The whispers on the wind seemed to carry a name, a warning he couldn't yet understand, but deeply, instinctively feared. The hunt had changed. He was no longer just the hunter. He might also be the hunted. Back in the village, the sun beat down on the third day since Nalin had walked into the Blackwood. 3 days. For a hunter of Nalin's known skill, tracking a puma should not have taken this long, even accounting for the caution needed when hunting alone. The initial confidence and well-wishing that had followed his departure had slowly evaporated, replaced by a growing unease that mirrored the heavy, humid air. Mahala felt the passing hours like stones pressing on her heart. She performed her daily tasks, grinding corn, fetching water, mending hides, but her movements were mechanical, her thoughts constantly straying north, towards the dark line of the forest. She scanned the horizon countless times, hoping to see a familiar figure emerging from the trees, praying for his safety. The small bird carving she had given him felt like a fragile hope against the vastness of the wilderness. Her father, the chief, maintained his stern composure in public, but Mahala saw the worry lines deepening around his eyes, the way his gaze lingered on the forest edge when he thought no one was looking. The subtle shift in the village atmosphere was undeniable. Where there had been respectful silence or quiet encouragement, now murmurs grew louder, feeding on the vacuum left by Nalin's absence. The doubters, those who had always felt Nalin was too young or not quite proven enough for the chief's daughter, found their voices. 3 days, sneered Mokai, a burly warrior who had himself once sought Mahala's attention, lounging near the central fire pit with a few others. Even an old woman could track a cat faster than that. He chuckled, a harsh, unpleasant sound. Perhaps the great hunter found the puma too frightening, another added, nudging his companion. Maybe he's hiding under a bush, waiting for it to go away. Laughter rippled through the small group. More likely, he was chased off by a rabbit. Mokai guffawed, slapping his knee. He's probably halfway back to his mother by now, crying for help. Mahala, passing nearby with a basket of herbs, heard the cruel jokes. Her face flushed with anger. She stopped, turning to face Mokai and his friends, her dark eyes flashing. "Nalin is braver than any of you," she said, her voice trembling slightly but clear and firm. "He faces dangers you would run from. Do not mistake his caution for cowardice." Mokai's smile faded slightly at her direct confrontation, but he quickly recovered his sneer. "Brave words, Mahala, but bravery doesn't bring back hides. Only skill does, and it seems your chosen one is lacking." He spat onto the dust, or perhaps he simply ran away from the challenge. Tears stung Mahala's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She held Mokai's gaze for another moment, her look conveying pure contempt, before turning sharply and walking away, her back straight. But inside, the cruel words echoed, planting seeds of fear alongside her worry. What if something had happened? What if he wasn't coming back? The Blackwood held known dangers, but her intuition, the same feeling that made her shiver when Nalin left, whispered of unknown threats lurking in its depths. The mockery didn't cease. It grew bolder as the day wore on, spreading like a contagion through parts of the village. The laughter became louder, the jokes cruder. It chipped away at the respect Nalin had earned, undermining the chief's challenge itself. Chief Chikari heard it, his expression hardening. The disrespect shown not just to Nalin, but implicitly to his daughter and his own decree, could not be ignored indefinitely. The waiting was becoming unbearable, the uncertainty a poison seeping into the village's heart. The laughter of the doubters grated against the backdrop of Mahala's silent fear and the chief's mounting concern. The sun began to dip towards the horizon again, marking the end of another day. And still, there was no sign of Nalin emerging from the deepening shadows of the Blackwood. The tension in the village was becoming as thick and heavy as the forest air itself. Deep within the Blackwood, far from the mocking laughter of the village, Nalin was consumed by a primal fear unlike anything he had ever known. The horrific discovery of the ravaged deer carcass and the monstrous tracks had irrevocably shifted his world. The familiar forest now felt alien, predatory. Every shadow seemed to pulse with unseen menace. Every rustle of leaves sounded like a stalking footstep. His original mission, the puma hunt for Mahala's hand, felt like a distant memory from another lifetime. Now, only survival mattered. He had abandoned the plateau, moving quickly but carefully away from the gruesome sight, constantly scanning his surroundings, his knife now drawn and held ready in his hand. He had retrieved his bow earlier, finding it wedged amongst the roots where he had fallen, a small mercy in this terrifying turn of events. He needed to get back towards the edge of the forest, back towards the familiar, safer territory. But which way was safest? The creature that left those tracks that killed with such savagery could be anywhere. As dusk began to bleed through the dense canopy, painting the undergrowth in shades of deep purple and grey, Nalin found himself near a tumble of large boulders and rocky overhangs at the base of a steep slope. The air was growing cold, and the shadows deepened, merging into an unbroken darkness beneath the trees. He thought he might find shelter here for the night, a defensible position perhaps. He scanned the rocks, searching for a suitable crevice. He heard it then, a low growl reverberating through the stillness, seeming to come from the rocks above him. It wasn't the throaty cough of a puma or the warning growl of a bear. This was deeper, rougher, filled with a chilling resonance that spoke of unnatural lungs. Nalin froze, his blood running cold. He slowly raised his bow, nocking an arrow, his eyes straining to penetrate the gloom gathering on the slope above. For a moment there was nothing but the pounding of his own heart. Then a large shape detached itself from the deepest shadow near an overhang. It was huge, far larger than any man, standing partially upright on two powerful legs, yet its form was hunched, bestial. Moonlight filtering through a gap in the canopy caught the glint of long, wicked claws extending from thick, fur-covered hands. Its head was lupine, wolf-like, with a long snout filled with rows of dagger-sharp teeth, bared in a terrifying snarl. And its eyes, they glowed with a faint predatory luminescence, yellow and filled with pure savage hunger. Nalin had heard legends, old tales whispered around council fires on the coldest nights, stories of monstrous things that walked the deep woods, creatures that were neither man nor beast, but something terrifyingly in between. He had always dismissed them as myths to frighten children, until now. The creature before him was real, horrifyingly real. A werewolf. It let out a terrifying howl, a sound that ripped through the twilight calm, echoing off the rocks. A chilling blend of a wolf's cry and a man's scream of rage. It wasn't a warning. It was a declaration of intent. It was going to kill him. Instinct took over. Nalin drew his bowstring taut, aimed for the center of the massive chest, and released. The arrow flew true, striking the creature with a solid thud. It roared in pain and fury, staggering back a step, but the shaft seemed ridiculously small against its thick hide and powerful muscles. It didn't fall. It didn't slow. It just got angrier. With astonishing speed for its bulk, the werewolf lunged down the slope towards him. Nalin barely had time to drop his bow and draw his knife. The creature crashed into him, the impact sending him staggering back against the cold rock face. Hot, foul breath washed over him, carrying the same rank scent he'd smelled earlier. Claws raked across his left arm, tearing through his tunic and searing his flesh like fire. Pain exploded through him, sharp and sickening. He reacted on pure instinct, shoving hard against the creature's chest while simultaneously slashing upward with his knife. The blade bit into flesh, drawing a guttural snarl, but the werewolf barely seemed to register the wound. It swiped again, claws aimed at his throat. Nalin ducked, twisting away, feeling the wind of the passage stir his hair. He scrambled backwards, desperately trying to put distance between himself and the monster. He tripped over a root, sprawling onto the ground. The werewolf was on him in an instant, its immense weight pinning him, its slavering jaws snapping inches from his face. He could see the raw fury in its glowing eyes, smell the scent of blood. His blood. He thrust his knife arm up, jamming the blade into the creature's shoulder with all his strength. It howled again, a sound of agony and rage, rearing back slightly. It was the chance Nalin needed. He kicked out violently, connecting with the creature's midsection, and scrambled free, rolling away down a short, steep embankment concealed by ferns and shadows. He landed hard amongst the roots of a large oak, the impact knocking the wind from him. His bow was gone, left behind near the rocks. His arm burned fiercely, blood soaking his sleeve. Above him, on the slope, he heard the werewolf crashing through the undergrowth, snarling in frustration and pain, searching for him. It hadn't followed him down the embankment immediately, perhaps momentarily disoriented or dealing with the knife wound in its shoulder. Nalin pressed himself flat against the damp earth, hidden in the deep shadows, hardly daring to breathe. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He was wounded, armed only with his knife, and being hunted by a nightmare made real. Listening to the beast's enraged movements above, a terrifying certainty washed over him. This was far from over. The true horror had just begun. Pain throbbed in Nalin's arm, a fiery counterpoint to the icy fear gripping his heart. He lay still for precious moments, hidden beneath the embankment, listening. The monstrous crashing and snarling continued above him, moving back and forth along the slope. The werewolf was searching, casting about for his scent, enraged by the wounds he had inflicted. He knew he couldn't stay here. Sooner or later, it would find him. Gritting his teeth against the pain, Nalin forced himself to move. He crawled deeper into the undergrowth, away from the embankment, moving with agonizing slowness to avoid making any sound. Every rustle of a leaf, every snap of a twig under his weight felt thunderously loud in the tense silence between the creature's movements. Blood dripped steadily from his wounded arm, leaving a trail he couldn't afford. He tore a strip of cloth from the bottom of his tunic with his teeth and good hand, awkwardly wrapping it tightly around the gash, hoping to staunch the flow and mask the scent. He needed to put distance between himself and the beast, but running blindly through the dark forest was suicide. He needed a plan, however desperate. Kayet's words surfaced again. Trust your instincts. His instincts screamed at him to flee, but also to be clever. He remembered the stream he had followed earlier. Water could wash away his scent, confuse the pursuit. He began moving parallel to the slope, keeping low, using every tree trunk, every bush, every patch of shadow as cover. The moon had risen higher, casting long, eerie shadows through the trees, creating illusions of movement that made his heart leap into his throat countless times. Above and behind him, he could still hear the occasional enraged growl, the sound of brush being trampled. The werewolf was still searching the area of the attack, but Nalin knew it wouldn't take long for a creature with such keen senses to realize its prey had slipped away, and to pick up the trail again. He moved through the dark woods like a phantom. His earlier hunting skills now turned towards evasion. He avoided open spaces, stepped on rocks whenever possible to leave less sign, tested the wind direction, trying to stay downwind of his pursuer. The forest, once a place of challenge and potential reward, had transformed into a terrifying labyrinth filled with unseen threats. The familiar sounds, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of a small animal in the leaves, now sounded like harbingers of doom, potentially masking the approach of the monster. He found the stream again, its faint gurgling a welcome sound in the oppressive silence. He slipped into the icy water without hesitation, wading downstream, letting the cold numb his throbbing arm and hopefully erase his tracks and scent. He stayed in the water for as long as he dared, moving through the shallows near the bank, using the overhanging bushes for cover. The cold seeped into his bones, making him shiver uncontrollably. But the fear of the creature behind him was a far greater chill. After what felt like an eternity, he cautiously emerged from the stream onto the opposite bank, soaked and shivering, but hopefully having broken the scent trail. He listened intently. He could no longer hear the crashing sounds from the slope behind him. Had he lost it? Or was it merely moving more silently now, stalking him with cunning patience? He couldn't know. He knew he needed shelter, a place to rest, however briefly, to tend his wound properly, to think. He scanned the dark woods, searching for any advantage. He saw a dense thicket of thorny bushes woven tightly together, almost impenetrable. Not ideal, but perhaps defensible for a short time. He pushed his way carefully into the thicket, the thorns tearing at his remaining clothes but creating a barrier around him. Hidden deep within the scratching embrace of the thorns, Nalin finally allowed himself a moment to catch his breath, his body trembling from cold, pain, and sheer terror. He unwrapped his makeshift bandage. The gash was deep, still oozing blood, the edges raw and angry. He cleaned it as best he could with water from his skin and reapplied the bandage, tighter this time. The pain was intense, but the fear was worse. The image of the werewolf's glowing eyes, its slavering jaws, was burned into his mind. He was alone, wounded, deep in hostile territory, hunted by a creature of nightmare. Despair gnawed at him, cold and sharp. How could he possibly survive this? How could he ever get back to the village, back to Mahala? For a moment, crouched in the dark, thorny embrace, he felt utterly, hopelessly lost. The forest seemed determined to swallow him whole. He could hear the faint whisper of the wind outside his thorny refuge, and it sounded like the predator's breath, waiting patiently. As the fourth day dawned over the village, the atmosphere had curdled from worry and mockery into something darker. The absence of Nalin was no longer just a topic for jokes. It was a heavy, unspoken dread that settled over the community. Even Mokai and his cronies had quieted their open laughter, though their skeptical glances and muttered comments persisted. The prolonged silence from the Blackwood felt unnatural, ominous. Mahala moved through the village like a ghost, her face pale, her eyes shadowed with lack of sleep. She had strained her ears for any sound from the north, prayed until her spirit felt raw. But the forest remained silent, offering no clues, no hope. The image of Nalin walking away, strong and determined, warred with terrifying visions conjured by her fear. Visions of accidents, of animal attacks, of him lost and alone. She clung to the memory of his promise, to the strength she knew he possessed. But the weight of 4 empty days pressed down on her relentlessly. Chief Chikari stood near the edge of the village, gazing towards the forbidding line of the Blackwood. His face was grim, his usual stoicism fraying at the edges. The continued mockery, though quieter now, was an insult to his authority and his daughter. But more than that, a genuine fear for the young warrior had taken root. Nalin was skilled, yes, but 4 days alone hunting a puma, even a difficult one, was too long. Kayet, the old hunter, had approached him earlier, his expression grave. "Chief," Kayet had said, his voice low, "no hunter, not even Nalin, should take this long for a puma unless something is wrong. The deep woods, they have their own spirits, their own dangers. It is not a place to linger alone. The elder's words confirmed the chief's own growing unease. The challenge had been intended as a test of skill and courage, a worthy trial for a potential son-in-law. It was never meant to be a death sentence. The disrespect Nalin had endured, the fear in his own daughter's eyes, and the ominous silence from the forest forced his hand. Tradition demanded the challenge be met alone, but the chief's responsibility was to his people, including the young man who sought to join his family. He turned, his decision made. He summoned 4 of his most seasoned warriors, men who knew the forest well, who were skilled trackers and fighters, men Nalin himself respected. They gathered quickly, their faces serious, understanding the gravity of the situation without needing lengthy explanation. "Nalin has been gone 4 days," the chief stated, his voice tight with command. "The puma hunt should be over. The Blackwood does not give up those who wander carelessly." He looked at each warrior in turn. "You will go into the forest, find Nalin's trail, follow it." His gaze hardened. "Learn what has happened. If he is injured, bring him back. If he has succeeded, escort him home. If—" The chief paused, the unspoken possibility hanging heavy in the air. "If the forest has claimed him, bring back news. Go now. Move swiftly. The spirits guide your path." The warriors nodded grimly. They gathered their own bows, quivers full of arrows, and knives. They carried small packs with essentials, their movements efficient and purposeful. There was no boasting now, no laughter. They knew the risks of the deep forest, even if they didn't suspect the specific horror that lurked there. They understood the chief's concern and the urgency of their mission. As dusk began to settle once more, casting long shadows across the village, the 4 warriors slipped quietly away from the familiar lodges and cooking fires. They moved towards the north, towards the waiting Blackwood, their faces set with determination. They were unaware of the unnatural terror Nalin had faced, unaware of the glowing eyes and savage claws that haunted the shadows. They were simply warriors on a mission, following their chief's orders, heading into the unknown to find one of their own. Their departure cast another layer of tension over the village, a silent acknowledgement that something was terribly wrong. Mahala watched them go, a silent prayer on her lips, her heart torn between hope that they would find Nalin and fear of what they might discover. The forest waited, holding its breath. Huddled within the thorny embrace of the thicket, Nalin shivered, though the night was not overly cold. Pain radiated from his wounded arm, a constant throbbing reminder of the werewolf's attack. Exhaustion weighed him down like a physical burden, blurring the edges of his thoughts. He hadn't slept properly since entering the Blackwood, and the terror of the previous night had drained him completely. Despair, cold and insidious, whispered in his mind. He was lost, wounded, hunted. The village, Mahala, felt impossibly far away, like memories from a fading dream. Perhaps Mokai and the others were right. Perhaps he wasn't worthy. Perhaps this dark, monstrous forest would be his grave. He closed his eyes, picturing Mahala's face, her look of faith and worry as he left. Then his fingers brushed against the small carved bird token tucked inside his tunic. He pulled it out, clutching the smooth wood in his good hand. It felt solid, real, a tangible link to the world he had left behind, to the reason he had undertaken this trial in the first place. He wasn't just fighting for his own survival now. He was fighting for her, for the future he had dared to hope for. A spark ignited within the cold ashes of his despair. Anger began to smolder. Anger at the beast that hunted him. Anger at his own fear. Anger at the thought of failing Mahala, of letting the doubters in the village be right. He would not die here, cowering in a bush like a frightened rabbit. He was Nalin, an Apache warrior. He had faced danger before, though nothing like this. He would face this too. His breathing steadied, his mind cleared. Fear was still present, a cold knot in his stomach, but determination now overlaid it. He couldn't outrun the creature indefinitely. He couldn't hide forever. If he was going to survive, he had to fight. He had wounded the beast. It wasn't invincible. Difficult, terrifying, but not impossible to kill. He needed a better place to make a stand. Somewhere he could use the terrain to his advantage. Somewhere the creature's size and strength would be somewhat negated. He thought back over the paths he had crossed. He remembered the narrow ravine near the plateau where he'd found the ravaged deer, steep sides choked with rocks and roots. A difficult place for the large beast to maneuver easily, offering him cover and potential choke points. It was risky, backtracking towards where he'd last seen signs of the creature, but it felt like his best chance. Carefully, painfully, he eased himself out of the thorny thicket. He checked his knife, ensuring the blade was still sharp, the handle secure in his grip. He took a long drink from his water skin, conserving the last mouthful. Then, moving with renewed purpose, though his body ached and his arms screamed in protest, he began to make his way back towards the ravine. He moved cautiously, using all his tracking skills in reverse, trying to anticipate where the werewolf might be, listening intently to the sounds of the night. Meanwhile, miles behind him, the 4 warriors sent by the chief moved swiftly through the moonlit forest. They easily picked up Nalin's trail near the forest edge, following it deeper into the Blackwood. They noted his steady progress, the signs of his skilled passage. Then, as they reached the area where Nalin had first encountered the strange signs, their pace slowed. They saw the unnaturally high claw marks on the trees, exchanging uneasy glances. They found the site of the ravaged deer carcass. They stopped horrified, examining the ground, the sheer violence of the kill, and the huge misshapen tracks. "No puma did this," one warrior, Taza, muttered, his hand instinctively going to his knife. "Nor bear," added the eldest of the group, Nahil. "These tracks, I have never seen their like." Fear, cold and sharp, touched them then. They knew Nalin had passed this way. They followed his tracks away from the plateau, their senses now on high alert, bows ready. They found the signs of the struggle near the rocky slope. Nalin's dropped bow, patches of disturbed earth, and drops of blood, clearly Nalin's. But mixed with it, scuff marks and more of the monstrous tracks, and darker, thicker spatters of blood that were clearly not human. They found a piece of torn, dark fur snagged on a rock. They looked at each other, the terrible truth dawning. Nalin hadn't merely gotten lost or injured in a fall. He had fought something monstrous. Their mission had just become infinitely more dangerous. They pressed on, following the mixed trail of blood and tracks with grim determination, knowing Nalin was wounded and hunted. Nalin reached the edge of the narrow ravine. Moonlight filtered down. illuminating the rocky passage. It was as he remembered, steep, cluttered, offering cover. He scouted briefly, choosing his spot, a narrow section where large boulders formed a bottleneck. With smaller rocks nearby, he could use for cover or possibly leverage. He wedged himself into a crevice between two rocks, his knife held ready. He was exposed, but it was the best tactical position he could find quickly. He calmed his breathing, focusing his mind, pushing the pain in his arm to the background. He was no longer prey, hiding in a thicket. He was a warrior preparing for battle. He didn't have to wait long. A low growl echoed from the mouth of the ravine. A large shadow detached itself from the darkness. The werewolf. It had found him. It stood there for a moment, its glowing yellow eyes fixing on Nalin's position, head lowered, lips curled back in a terrifying snarl. It remembered the sting of his knife. Nalin gripped his own knife tighter, his knuckles white. Let it come. He was ready. There was no preamble, no hesitation. The werewolf launched itself into the ravine with terrifying speed, a blur of dark fur and gleaming claws, its enraged howl echoing off the narrow rock walls. Nalin flattened himself against the cold stone of his crevice as the beast charged past, the wind of its passage stirring his hair, its sheer bulk momentarily blocking the moonlight. It skidded to a halt further down the ravine, realizing it had overrun its target and turned. Its glowing eyes burning with hatred, it prowled back towards Nalin, moving more cautiously now, testing the uneven footing, its massive shoulders bunched, claws extended. Nalin gripped his knife, his heart pounding against his ribs like a war drum. He knew he couldn't match the creature's brute strength. He had to rely on agility, speed, and the terrain. As the werewolf lunged again, aiming for the crevice, Nalin darted out, low and fast. He slashed at the creature's extended foreleg, drawing another roar of pain and fury. The beast swiped back, claws whistling past Nalin's head, as he ducked behind one of the large boulders that formed the bottleneck. The werewolf slammed into the rock, shaking the ground, momentarily thwarted by the narrow passage. Nalin used the brief respite to scramble atop the boulder. From this slightly elevated position, he could see the creature's broad back, its powerful muscles rippling beneath the thick fur. It roared again, turning its attention upwards, trying to find purchase on the sheer rock face to reach him. This was his chance. With a yell born of desperation and defiance, Nalin leaped from the boulder onto the werewolf's back, wrapping his good arm around its thick neck, driving his knife down with all his strength towards where he hoped its heart or lungs lay. The impact was jarring. The beast bellowed, a sound of pure agony, and began to thrash violently, bucking and twisting, trying to dislodge him. Nalin clung on desperately, his wounded arm screaming in protest, his legs clamped tight around the creature's torso. It felt like riding an earthquake. The werewolf slammed itself against the ravine walls, trying to crush him. Rocks rained down around them. Nalin felt sharp pain as his side scraped against the stone. But he held on, his knife still embedded deep in the creature's back, though he couldn't tell how much damage it was doing. The werewolf spun, dropping onto its front legs, then violently rolled, trying to pin Nalin beneath its immense weight. Nalin kicked free just in time, losing his grip on the knife handle, but seeing the blade remain buried in the beast's flesh. He landed hard on the rocky ground, the impact stealing his breath, He scrambled backwards, putting distance between himself and the thrashing monster. The werewolf struggled back to its feet, slower now, blood flowing freely from the wound in its back and the earlier gash on its shoulder. It turned towards Nalin, its glowing eyes filled with murderous intent, ignoring the knife protruding from its back. It was wounded, enraged, but far from defeated. It stalked towards him again, limping slightly, but no less terrifying. Nalin backed away, searching frantically for another weapon, any advantage. His eyes fell on a smaller, jagged rock nearby. He scooped it up, its rough edges biting into his palm. It wasn't much, but it was something. The werewolf charged, a low guttural growl rumbling in its chest. Nalin stood his ground for a split second, then dodged sideways as the creature lunged. He swung the jagged rock with all his might, connecting solidly with the side of the werewolf's head. The beast staggered, shaking its head, momentarily dazed. Nalin didn't waste the opening. He lunged forward, not attacking, but retrieving his knife, yanking it free from the creature's back with a sickening squelch. He jumped back again as the werewolf recovered, roaring, blood now matting the fur on its head where the rock had struck. They circled each other warily in the narrow confines of the ravine. Hunter and hunted reversed, then reversed again. Nalin was bleeding, exhausted, his body battered and bruised. The werewolf was heavily wounded, enraged, its movements slightly slower, but still possessing terrifying strength. Nalin knew he couldn't keep this up for long. His strength was failing. He needed to end this now. He feinted left, then darted right as the werewolf lunged, trying to get past its defenses, aiming for its throat or chest. But the creature was learning, anticipating his moves. It spun, backhanding him with immense force. Nalin flew through the air, slamming into the ravine wall again, stars exploding behind his eyes. His knife clattered away from his grasp. He slumped to the ground, dazed, vulnerable. The werewolf advanced, its shadow falling over him, jaws dripping, claws flexing. This was it. He had fought bravely, but it wasn't enough. He closed his eyes, thinking of Mahala one last time. Suddenly, a shout echoed from the mouth of the ravine. "Nalin!" Nalin's eyes snapped open. The werewolf paused, its head cocked, distracted by the new sound. Hope, fierce and desperate, surged through Nalin. Torches flared at the entrance to the ravine, casting flickering, dancing light onto the grim scene. 4 figures stood there. Taza, Nahil, and the other 2 warriors dispatched by the chief. They had followed the sounds of the struggle, the monstrous roars, and Nalin's defiant yells, arriving at this critical moment. Their faces, illuminated by the torchlight, were masks of shock and disbelief. They saw Nalin, slumped against the rock wall, bleeding and battered. And looming over him, saliva dripping from its fangs, eyes glowing with malevolent yellow light, was the creature of nightmares, the werewolf. It was larger, more terrifying than anything the gruesome tracks had prepared them for. Fear, cold and primal, washed over the seasoned warriors. They froze, momentarily paralyzed by the horrific sight. The werewolf turned its head fully towards the newcomers, distracted by the sudden appearance of more prey, or perhaps startled by the bright, flickering flames of the torches. It let out a low, warning growl, its attention momentarily diverted from the injured Nalin on the ground. That split second of distraction was all Nalin needed. Adrenaline surged through him, overriding the pain and exhaustion. He saw his knife lying on the rocks just a few feet away. While the beast's glowing eyes were fixed on the warriors at the ravine entrance, Nalin lunged not away, but towards the knife, scooping it up. The werewolf sensed the movement, spinning back towards him with astonishing speed. Fury reignited in its eyes. It lowered its head, preparing for the final killing charge. But Nalin didn't retreat. Fueled by desperation and the sudden, unexpected hope of rescue, or at least of not dying alone, he met the charge head-on. He dodged the initial snap of its jaws, ducking under a swiping claw. He was inside its reach now, too close for its powerful limbs to get full leverage. He remembered the feel of the creature's thick hide, the way his arrow had barely slowed it, the shallow penetration of his first knife thrusts. He needed a vital spot. As the werewolf tried to rear up, perhaps to bring its full weight down on him, Nalin saw his chance. The underside of its jaw, the thick neck, the powerful chest rising above him. Recalling anatomical knowledge from countless hunts, he aimed for the vulnerable spot just below the ribcage, angling the blade upwards with every ounce of his remaining strength. He drove the knife in deep. A different sound tore from the werewolf's throat this time. Not a roar of fury, but a high-pitched gurgling shriek of mortal agony. It reared back violently, its glowing eyes widening in shock and pain. Its claws scrabbled uselessly at the ravine walls. It staggered, its massive body trembling uncontrollably. Dark, steaming blood poured from the wound where Nalin's knife was buried to the hilt. The creature took one faltering step back, then another. Its legs buckled. It crashed to the ground with a shuddering impact that shook the ravine floor, landing mere feet from where Nalin stood, panting, covered in dirt and blood, his own and the creature's. The werewolf twitched once, twice, a final shudder running through its massive frame, and then lay still. The eerie yellow glow faded from its eyes, leaving them glassy and vacant. Silence descended, absolute and profound, broken only by Nalin's ragged gasps for air and the crackling hiss of the torches held by the stunned warriors at the ravine entrance. Nalin stood swaying, his knife still clutched in his hand, staring down at the monstrous form sprawled on the rocks. He had done it. He had survived. He had won. He looked towards the torchlight, towards the faces of his tribesmen, their expressions shifting from terror to stunned disbelief, and then slowly to unmistakable awe. He had faced the nightmare, and they had witnessed it. For a long moment, no one moved. The four warriors remained frozen at the ravine entrance, torches held high, staring at the colossal, still form of the werewolf and at Nalin, who stood trembling but upright beside it. The sheer shock of what they had witnessed held them captive. Then Nahil, the eldest warrior, took a slow, cautious step forward, his eyes never leaving the dead beast. Taza and the others followed, their initial fear slowly giving way to a profound respect. They approached Nalin, their faces etched with awe. "Nalin," Nahil said, his voice raspy with emotion. "By the spirits, what is this creature?" Nalin finally lowered his knife, exhaustion washing over him in waves now that the adrenaline was fading. "I do not know its name," he managed, his voice hoarse. "It hunted me, since yesterday." The warriors exchanged glances. They looked at Nalin's wounds, the bleeding gash on his arm, the bruises and scrapes covering his body, the exhaustion plain on his face. Then they looked again at the monster he had slain single-handedly. Their respect deepened. "You are hurt," Taza said, stepping forward and gently examining Nalin's arm. "This needs proper tending." They worked quickly, their earlier shock replaced by efficient action, while two warriors kept a wary eye on the dead werewolf, as if fearing it might rise again. Taza and Nahil cleaned Nalin's wounds using supplies from their packs and fresh water from a nearby seep. They applied soothing herbs and bound his arm securely with clean wrappings. They offered him water and dried meat, which Nalin accepted gratefully, his strength slowly beginning to return. "We must take proof," Nahil declared, looking at the werewolf. "No one would believe this tale otherwise." He drew his own heavy hunting knife. After a moment's grim work, he severed one of the creature's massive clawed hands and carefully wrapped it in a piece of hide from his pack. The trophy was gruesome, but undeniable. The journey back was slow. The warriors supported Nalin, ensuring he didn't stumble on the uneven ground. They moved through the Blackwood, now stripped of its terrifying immediacy, but still feeling alien and menacing in the lingering darkness before dawn. There was little conversation, the shared experience, the horror they had witnessed, and Nalin's incredible bravery spoke volumes more than words could convey. As the first pale light of dawn began to filter through the trees, they finally emerged from the oppressive shadows of the Blackwood onto the familiar plains. The village was visible in the distance, smoke already curling lazily from the cooking fires. Their approach did not go unnoticed. Figures emerged from the wickiups, drawn by the sight of the returning party. A murmur went through the gathering crowd. They saw Nalin, alive, supported by the warriors, clearly injured but walking. A wave of relief washed through many. Mahala, who had kept vigil near the forest edge all night, saw him and her heart leaped. She started forward, tears of relief finally spilling down her cheeks. But then the crowd saw what Nahil carried, the massive, furred hand with its wicked claws. The murmurs died instantly, replaced by gasps of shock and fear. Villagers backed away, eyes wide, staring at the horrifying trophy. The doubters, including Mokai, who had been lounging near the entrance, were struck dumb, their earlier sneers wiped clean from their faces, replaced by disbelief and a dawning apprehension. Chief Chikari emerged from his lodge, his face stern, demanding silence with his mere presence. He saw Nalin, saw his wounds, saw the warriors supporting him, and then his gaze fell upon the monstrous hand Nahil carried. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly. Nahil stepped forward, unwrapping the trophy and laying it on the ground before the chief. "Chief Chikari," he said, his voice resonating with gravity. "We found Nalin deep within the Blackwood. He was not hunting the puma. He was fighting this." He gestured towards the severed hand, a creature of nightmare. "We arrived only at the end. We witnessed Nalin slay the beast alone, after fighting it wounded through the night." Taza and the other warriors nodded solemnly, confirming Nahil's account. A collective gasp went through the village. All eyes turned to Nalin, no longer seeing just a young hunter, but someone who had faced unimaginable terror and emerged victorious. The mockery and doubt vanished completely, replaced by stunned silence, then whispers of awe. Mahala reached Nalin's side, gently touching his uninjured arm, her eyes searching his face, filled with relief, pride, and love. Nalin met her gaze, a weary but genuine smile touching his lips. Chief Chikari looked down at the monstrous clawed hand, then at Nalin's bloodied but resolute face, then at the expressions of awe on his seasoned warriors' faces. He understood. The trial he had set had led Nalin not to a test of skill, but to a confrontation with true horror. And Nalin had not faltered. He had proven his courage, his strength, his spirit in a way no puma hide ever could. He stepped forward, placing a firm hand on Nalin's shoulder. He looked out at his people, his voice ringing with authority and newfound pride. "Nalin," he declared, his voice clear and strong, silencing the remaining whispers. "You went into the Blackwood to prove your worthiness. You faced not the challenge I set, but a darkness far greater. You fought with the heart of a true Apache warrior. You protected yourself, and unknowingly, perhaps you protected this village from a danger we did not know existed." He looked directly at Nalin, his stern face softening with respect. "You have proven yourself far beyond any trial I could devise. You have earned my respect. You have earned your place among our bravest, and you have earned the hand of my daughter." A cheer erupted from the village, genuine, heartfelt, and thunderous. The earlier tension and doubt were washed away in a wave of communal relief and admiration. Nalin stood tall, supported by Mahala, feeling the warmth of his people's acceptance, the weight of the chief's approval, and the depth of Mahala's love. He had gone into the Blackwood seeking honor and the right to marry. He returned bearing wounds and a terrifying trophy, but also with a heroism forged in the crucible of nightmare, having won not just the chief's daughter, but the unwavering respect of his entire tribe. The true test had been met, and the hero had come home. Nalin faced the nightmare and won. Did that final battle get your heart pounding? Keep that victorious energy flowing. Smash that like button if you stood with Nalin. Subscribe right now, because legends like this are just the beginning. You don't want to miss what horrors and heroes we unleash next. And comment below. What was the single bravest moment that gave you chills? Your engagement fuels this channel. Let's keep these epic stories alive together.